All right, welcome to another week of ShopBot training. Today we are going to focus on creating foam inserts for a toolbox. A few weeks ago, I went to get my tools out of the car, and they weren't there. I said last week somebody liked them more than me, so they decided they should have them. So I needed to make myself and gather up new tools and make a new toolkit. My toolbox that I keep for traveling is a Pelican case, and inside of the Pelican case, I've layered up uh, 2-inch thick foam with the cutout of each tool or each type of tool, and can just layer them in there, which is serves two great purposes. One, it keeps all the tools from banging and smacking around through travel. And then the second one is the most important for me is since each tool has its spot and its little foam insert cutout, when I'm on the job and I'm all done, I know that I am leaving with all the tools that I came with, because if I am not, that means I have an empty slot. So again, my name is Ryan Patterson, and we are going to talk about foam inserts, and most of it is going to be done through bitmap tracing and also being able to scale that tracing to what the real world is. So through the training should be a fairly quick one. So we should have plenty of time for questions and answers. I know typically a lot of people don't like to ask questions, but that is what we're here for. So we're just going to get started. Feel free to interrupt me anytime you have a question, or if I did something, even if it is not related to the topic that's being discussed. If you see me click on something and you wonder why I did that or how I did that, please interrupt me and just ask the question. So what I have done is taken a picture of each of the tools that I would like to have in this case. Unfortunately, I haven't quite finished the purchasing of all the tools that have gone missing, but I have gathered a few. So inside of my, uh, just here's the pictures. I have taken a picture of how I would like to have those down into the case. And I am not sure why it's taking so long for it to open up a photo. But it is along with that I also had a rule that I laid down to take a picture as well with that rule, so we're able to use that for scaling. Um, well, once I import that photo into VCarve, there, finally. So there's a couple of things that we need to kind of pay attention to when we go to scale this and view this. So there is a section of where I place this on the ruler, so you could see that the end of the rule does not appear to be at the end or the total length of the wrench set. In fact, it is at the lower side. So there's some depth here, and that skewed depth is messing things up a little bit. So there's a couple things that I did. I didn't am not going to completely rely on what I'm reading in this measuring tape for its depth or for its size. I also wrote down on a piece of paper what the different dimensions were. So for example, for these wrenches, I have measured out the total height of this wrench, or like a bounding box, to be 9 3/4 in this direction, and then 3 1/8 inches total in width. So we're going to kind of use both of those numbers to verify or try to scale this as close to possible as what it is in real life. So just jump right into VCarve Pro. I've set up the job dimensions here to be the size of the Pelican case itself. In the overall job, I'll later take these tools and then just kind of move them to another instance of VCarve Pro, because the foam that I have comes in big sheets, and I want to have them all nested out. So the first thing, just starting here, because a lot of it is going to be kind of tedious, drawing the tools and getting them laid out. So go ahead and import a bitmap. And as we saw from that photo, 9 3/4 is really where the total width of this is. And the measuring tape here looks like it's going out to 10 1/8. That's not the case. The depth or the height of that is kind of skewing that a little bit. So basically what we're going to do is just do a bitmap tracing and put a line over top of where and how I want to have this pocketed out of the foam. Now, when we select off of the picture or deselect a photo, it changes colors and goes to a kind of maybe a more transparent color. In some cases, that works well because then you're able to see line drawing that you over top of it. But in other cases, it becomes very washed out and you can't quite see it. So to darken this back up, I'm going to select it, right click, and select Object Properties. Then we're able to use the slider to give it a more of a washed out appearance or more of a non-washed out, and close that. So again, going back into the line tool and just going to sketch out the bounding box, or how I would like to have this cut into the material. And that arc that just happened there is from the new feature of VCarve Pro and Aspire, where when you're drawing lines and you click and you hold, and all of a sudden it becomes this Bezier curve. I am so far not a fan of that feature because it more or less converts to an arc more than I want it to, just because of the way I tend to click the mouse. So if does that happen to you, that is because of the lines when you click and hold, and it will drag around. So what I just did there to convert that back to a line was went into node editing and right clicked on that arc or that Bezier curve and say that I went to a line. Later, we'll see how to take it from a line to a curve. But for that case, that was from a curve to a line. Now, there is a lot more detail that I really could get into if I wanted to. I mean, I could just do little notches and, around every round. I'm not going to take that time for this. All I need to do is make sure that the foam insert is tight enough to kind of snug these wrenches down in and to be able to hold them in place. So once those are complete, that is done, I'm going to select the bounding box that we just drew and then come over to the scale selected object size. And I'm going to hope that it scales proportionally. So this is like double checking to see how things, the picture is, but then we also have some skewing to pay attention to. What angle did I have that camera on? So it may not be a proportional scale. That is the reason why it's always good to take a X dimension and a Y dimension of the object that you're wanting to scale. So again, our wrench total length in the X direction here was 9 3/4 inch. And then the Y dimension was, or is, 3 1/8 inches. So It is not a proportional scale. I may have had, as I said, the camera not shooting straight down on it, a little bit of skewing happening within the lens camera itself. So we're not going to be able to do a proportional scale for this. I'm going to uncheck the link X and Y and change this Y value to 3 1/8 inches. Select apply, then close. So we now have the pattern for the wrenches. I'm just going to kind of shift that up over top and move it aside. As I go through this, may even want to draw some text, not that I would cut this, in to the foam. So when I get done with all of the drawings for all of the tools, and I look at this shape and I wonder, what is that supposed to be? So when we're nesting these back in to fit within the tool case, I'll know that those are wrenches. So once that one is done, I'm going to go ahead and delete the picture. So I selected it, hit delete on the keypad. And I actually have two sets of wrenches, one imperial and one in metric. So we'll just do a select it once, again to where we could drag and drop it. Holding the controlled key down as I move it is going to make a duplicate copy of what I just moved. So that is both of those wrenches done. I'll just go through that process once more, and I do apologize. This may be a lot redundant here, so please feel free to ask any questions that you have. And I will point out, after we trace one more object here, I took this picture from farther away just to see how the skewing of the photo would work. It seems like it worked a little bit better farther out. For example, we are almost 2 inches thick on this voltmeter, and the direction and the distance that we have here is looking like it is 6.5 inches. And what I wrote down is actually 6.5 inches. So what I did when I took this picture, when I held the camera closer to the object, it looked like it was bigger than the 6.5. So as I was looking at the viewfinder on the camera, I slowly pulled the camera away until I was able to see the rule line up and match the actual height and width of the item itself. So we'll see how this one scales out, see if this one goes proportionally. So again, is this going into the line tool? And it, again, gets a little washed out to kind of be able to see it. So I'm going to right click, select the object, right click, object properties, and move that in a little. So now that means when I deselect, that picture is going to stay roughly about the same shade or color. Now, I'm not being as precise as I would be if this was an actual, see, there's that arc thing again. I held the button down just a little bit. As I'm not being as precise with it as if I were actually, trying to cut this out as a decorative piece. I might pay a little bit more attention to how it is drawing. But again, I'm not worried about exact fit. I am just making sure that it's snug enough to fit in place. But I do need to modify some of those points here, smooth them out a little bit. We're going to go into node editing. And with node editing, notice that we always have the start endpoints and some control points. There is a midpoint, kind of a ghosted node. So that allows you to just drag out another node if you want to. Although I do not want to there. I want to convert that to an arc. This node here, I will smooth it. I know the letter S is for smoothing because when you right click over top of any of these nodes or a line span, you're going to get a menu. So if we right click here, we could see an option for converting to a Bezier. So that was along the line that I selected. But if I select right click over top of the node, I get an option to be able to smooth that out. And notice that's a smooth point. That letter S is the shortcut. A is the shortcut for arc. So I'll point out what I did there. So I am going to later convert this to a Bezier curve and then smooth this point here. But I am going to undo that just so we could see what happens first. I could right click and smooth this point, which kind of is a little bit more work because I have to then move the little nodes aside and not crazy about that extra work. So what I typically do on an outside corner or something that is more of a direct radius, I will first move it to an arc. That gives me one control point that I could then move down into is about as smooth as I could see by eye. Once that is done, we could smooth this, but we can't smooth from an arc to a Bezier curve, only from a Bezier to Bezier or line to line. So I now need to convert this arc to a Bezier curve. That now allows us to smooth this out here. So that just converted that to a smooth curve. For this point, I'm just going to go straight into smoothing that out at that point. And here is where I accidentally held the key down, the mouse button a little too long as I was tracing around. So convert that back to a line. Again, going into arc. So that kind of went wonky because of again, the curve. It doesn't look like it, but we see these little control points here. Even though that line looks straight, it is not a straight line because it's got those points there. So again, going to convert that to a line. Now allows us to smooth that out a little nicer. Then again, if anybody has any questions about what I'm doing or how I'm doing, or if you just think I'm not doing it correctly, that's okay. Speak up, and I am always willing to learn as well. All right, so we are back at the beginning, and now we have an item that looks like it is going to be just about right if it is the right size. To make it the right size, again, going to select the vector, coming over to set selected object size, and I'm going to link the two together because I want to just see how lucky we get first. So the voltmeter is 6.5. That's actual measurement that I wrote down, and I could also confirm that by what I see here in the image. The width of this, or the height in the Y direction from what I wrote down, is 3¼ inches, and it's 3.2 0.29. So that is scaled really proportionally. And I think it had a lot to do with how I took this photo by having it, the focal length be a little bit farther away, and making sure that I was able to see in the picture the actual dimension of what that is. And I will try to explain this just a little bit more on another set of pictures that I attempted to try first, and quickly realized that that skewing of the photos was going to be a problem. So I'm going to leave that as is and select apply. So it got a little bit bigger than the photo. I could delete that photo now. One more item that I want to I'm going to manually draw into place here, and that is with the voltmeter. It's got the probes and the wires. I didn't roll those up, so I'm just going to sketch out a rectangle here, and I know the probe length was 3.5 inches, and I needed like 1.25 inches for it to kind of roll up and go into there. Place that somewhere right around there, and then just gonna draw in another rectangle right there to be able to trim that away. So now when the voltmeter goes in there, I have a place to put the probe and the wire from that. So again, we will move that, shift it over there, going into the text. Just typing a little note to myself on what that is. Again, I don't plan on cutting those labels out into the material, but I'm putting them there for when I go to start laying this out, I know what those are. All right, so I'm going to bring in another set of pictures and kind of show how I thought I was going to have a great idea, but it didn't work out so well. So I'm going to go to import images. All right, so let's take a look at screwdriver here. So that, yeah, I didn't quite get all of the calipers in that one. So my bright idea was being able to take a photo of the tools that I wanted along with a set of calipers in there. So I could see, I set the distance to be 3 inches. And my thinking here was, after I trace all of this out, I would be able to sketch a line at the ends of the calipers here, and then go ahead and select both of those. Well, run through there and we'll see this, but selecting object size, it's 5 inches, but I was going to reduce that to 3 because that's what's in the readout right here. And that is a total scale of 59%. I thought I would be able to use that 59% and scale the entire object that way. I will trace this and then see how that how my idea failed. And then I will try to explain why it failed, and we'll hopefully be able to see the skewing issue that I've been talking about. So the more you do tracing in bitmap work, the the faster you'll be able to get at it. It doesn't take too long once you've done it, enough times. All right, going into node edit and when I was taking these pictures, like I said earlier, I wrote the dimensions down. I also made note of the total thickness of each of the items, because as we go to cut this out, we're going to need to know how deep to cut this into the foam so that it is completely flush or into the foam just a little bit to allow it to be stacked. All right, so it's a little crude, but I think we get the idea of that. So my idea was, again, to be able to select both of those items there that I traced out to the extents of the calipers, which is supposed to be 3 inches. Going into the object scale, changing that to 3 inches, and I can see it scaling down by 59.81 and change numbers. So I'm just going to select that, right click, and copy the value. I will now select the tracing and paste that value in. So with that done, I was really hoping that this Y value or X value now would match up to exactly what I have measured. And this one actually didn't do too terribly bad. But the Y is completely out of whack. So the real number here is 7 5/8 by 1 inch. So it's almost 7/8 of an inch off in the Y value here. So now let's take a look. Now I'm going to hit apply here and just see what happens. So I did measure these lines is 3 inches. There's a couple reasons why this did not work. One is this line, 2 lines are 3 inches apart, but they're also rotated at 3 inches apart. So when we went to scale this, it scaled from the outer boundaries of the line. So if we took a rectangle, we could see that we're off by that dimension there. So that kind of is the skewing of everything that we did. The other thing that is happening, if you know calipers, the inside dimension between the bottom forks here is the same as what we have on the outside, which would lead us to believe if we drew a straight line down along there, it should line up with this out here. Reality is it does not. So that is how the camera has kind of skewed the proportions off a little bit for us. And we can see it's kind of the opposite on the left side. So these two draw objects here are really, you can see I'm shifting it over, and that width is roughly the same, but with the skewing, it's just not the same. So it is really, something like that is how that is. Now, I'm sure I could do some math and figure out what those numbers are and kind of get it laid flat. But with what we did by double taking those numbers in both directions, that kind of does away with that effect. So again, going to select that object and do a set size, and the width is 7.625, and that's 7 5/8. Now, I think most probably know, but if I didn't know what 0.625 was, we are able to do math within the text box. So I could say 6 plus 5/8. So it's 7 5/8. I'm going to hit equals, and we can see that that brings it down to 6 5/8, or 7 5/8. And there's that number. You see that just a little bit of number made that quite a bit smaller. And I measured it to be not 1.17. I measured it to be an inch. So I'm going to change that to an inch and apply. And again, just going to push that over to the side. For the socket, I am also going to draw in another circle here. And that is because we're going to pocket this out at 2 different depths. When I lay this into the toolkit, the socket section, the ratcheting section, is going to be face down. So I don't want to completely pocket out all of the area to have the socket really buried down into the foam. I just want to have this little area here a little bit deeper to make that difference. I'm going to take a look a little bit at some layout now. I have a whole slew of other tools that we need to draw in. There's no sense in boring you with all of that monotonous detail. And look at a little bit of laying that out and getting them to fit on the sheets, and see how we could go from one to the other and some tool pathing. But before we go any further, does anybody have any questions?
It's not a question, but I was hoping that you would talk to us a little bit about the foam and maybe where you find it. I'm not sure where to go buy foam for a project like this.
Yeah, I am in search of that myself. I have come across a couple websites, and the search term that I used to find it is 5S. 5S foam. That will get you what we're looking for. I will just kind of do that first. I'm going to take this off screen because I've learned with Google, you think you're searching for something and you end up seeing something else. So we won't publicly show that until I confirm that it got what I wanted. Yes. So 5S foam, and it is a colored foam that I plan on using. So this is how I want to do it. Now, what I'm challenged with finding right now is the dual color foam in thicker material. So I think what I'm going to have to do is, this foam comes in 1/2 inch thicknesses. So I think I'm going to buy like 1.5 inch solid color foam, and then a 1/2 inch colored foam, and then use contact cement, glue that together, then cut it out. And basically that's how they make this foam here anyway. So I am going to probably just, do this search, and next week when we get all of this cut, we'll find it. Yep, there you go. Thank you for pointing out there, Mr. Color. Kazan foam is another search term to use. Any other questions on the foam cutting? or I mean, tracing or getting all these tools laid out or drawing.
Hey Ryan, I had a quick question.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, is there a benefit to bitmap tracing by hand versus using the tool, the bitmap trace tool?
Yes, the Bitmap Trace tool, I shouldn't have just deleted that. I'll bring that in. You'll see what happens here on this photograph. For the bitmap tracing, as you zoom in, it really gets distorted. So the bitmap tracing is going to try to find the contrast between the two. And to our eyes, we could clearly see this wrench is a different color or a different section than the white. But we'll try it. We'll see what happens. So with that selected, I'm going to use the tracing tool. So we could slide this bar across to give us try to give us the coloring that we want, but as we could see, it's seeing some of this as the same color as the boundary, so that we're going to have a far amount or a lot more cleanup work tracing something like this than if we just did it by hand. And you can see it's even picking up the shadow of the part there as well. So if you have a very good contrast between one item and the other item, that automatic tracing works great. But if there isn't much contrast, you'll end up spending a lot more time cleaning the drawing up versus actual, drawing and getting it done.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for showing that.
Yep. So we'll just go ahead and use these three drawings here. And I'm just going to move those onto the board on the material and look at how I would go about toolpathing such an item. So it's not quite how I would lay it out. As I said, it is going to be stacked. So all the wrenches would be on one. I would put my voltmeter, multimeter on another layer that also has all the other, wire strippers or anything that's related, trying to keep related objects all on one set of material. So we're going to look at kind of multi-depth cutting here as well. And there's some multi-depth cutting that we have for the socket wrench. And then also, I did trim this away, but we're going to actually recombine some of this to get some multi-depth cutting here as well, because the voltmeter itself is 2 inches thick, or it's like 1 7/8. But I don't need it to go 1 7/8 for the probes and the cabling. So the first thing, when I have multiple depths within a job like this, and right now we only have a few, but it tends to get confusing with toolpaths. So I don't focus, even though I'm ready for toolpathing, I don't focus on the toolpathing just yet. I focus on organizing what I want to cut through layers. So I'm going to go to the layers menu, or the tab for layers. I'm going to add a new tab, and I am going to set the layer name to the depth that I want to have cut. So the layer name is going to be 1, and I'm going to try something that I don't normally do, just see how it works. I wouldn't normally put 0.375 here. I don't know if layers allow that or not. No, sure enough, it does. I usually put just an underscore or 1D375 or something like that. But that is nice to know. I might change my habits a little bit. The socket is a total depth of 1/2 of an inch. So I'm just going to go 0.5. Then we have another depth for the voltmeter, which is 1 3/8, and another layer for the wrenches, which is, oh, we do the wrenches at 1 3/8, the socket at 1/2 inch, the voltmeter. Call the wires, I need that to be 1 inch. And the total depth on this extra pocket is that 1/2 inch plus the depth, which is 5/8. So we're going to say total depth for this one is going to be, I should do math, 1.125. There we go. So those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different depths of cuts that we're going to have here. And by doing them on the layers this way, kind of helps organize and keep my brain straight when I go to Toolpath and make sure we get it all set just right. And before I even go to the Toolpaths yet, I'm going to move these objects onto the layer that I want them to be associated with. So the wrenches, I'm going to select those, right click, and I want to move to a layer that is going to be 1 3/8 deep. The outside of this wrench, I'm going to right click and move that to a layer that is 5/8 deep. Oh, I did not make that. So let's go 1/2 inch deep. And say I'm already getting myself confused. So another way of doing it is not right clicking and moving to, you could copy to or move to a new layer. So again, I got the wrenches done, this section done. Let's go right click, move to a layer of 1 1/8. Now I want to have this as multi-layer depth, so I can't have this all pocketed out that way. So I'm going to kind of re-put that back together the way I originally had it, just by putting a line through here. Do a Control C to copy that to the clipboard. That is allowing me to trim that away, to do a Control Paste to paste that back in. And selecting that, I'm going to do a Control X, Control Z to undo that. Select that with a Control X, and then trim the lower section away and paste that back in. So now I have the two separate depths. Going to move this section to the 1 7/8 depth, and this one move to new layer of 1 inch. So now everything is on the layer that is associated with a depth. And to confirm that, we could hover or select the object, and then the bottom right here, it shows that the layer L is equal to 1 3/8. Let's see, 1 3/8, 1/2 inch, 1 1/8, 1 inch, and then 1 7/8. So now we can see that they are all on separate layers. We can now use those layers to create the toolpaths because all our depths and all this is already kind of figured out. So let's jump over to the Toolpaths tab. And I am going to select to use a pocket. Remove that tool that I have in there. And I'm not setting the depth just yet because I don't know what I'm doing. We're going to go down the list. Set for 1/4 inch end mill. do an offset and use the selector tool here. So I'm going to click select. I want to have all closed vectors. I want to associate it with the toolpath because if I draw new objects on that layer, I want those to be recalculated with a recalculation of. And I'm going to start at the top. I'm going to select all layers that are on the 1 3/8 layer. You can see that those wrench automatically became selected. Going to give that toolpath name a 1 3/8 name. And now with that, I know I am selecting the depth of cut to be 1 3/8 and select calculate. Going back into the profile toolpath again, everything, not profile toolpath, the pocketing toolpath. Everything is exactly as it was before. I'm going to come down to selector and select the next in line object, which is 1/2 inch. Change the name to D5. Go back to the top and change the cut depth to be 0.5. And calculate. And it becomes just a rinse and repeat. And by starting at the top and working our way down, when you come back into the selector, it has automatically checked the layer that you previously selected. So I'm going to uncheck the previous one and check the next one down. Remember, that's 1 7/8. Going to the top and changing the depth. Back to the bottom, click calculate. There's one thing that I think I'm forgetting to check, so we'll see what happens when I go here. Selector and the associate with toolpath. It'd be nice if that remembered that location. 1. All right, so one final depth that we need to do, and that is here in this section here. There's a couple ways around this. If anybody has ever wondered what the start depth is, or you just not know what the use of this start depth for, that is this case right now. You have to kind of be careful with it a little bit. It works great in this exact application. So we have already removed the material here. So we could see that we've already removed 1/2 inch of material. So our start depth is going to be 0.5. Now the total cut depth here now is going to be from that 0.5. So we want to go down another 0.5 for a total depth of 1 inch, or going down to a total depth of 5/8 to give us that total depth of 1 1/8 inches. Going into the selector, going to select that there, and now the challenge that we have with this, doing it this way, is on that layer 1 1/8, I have to remember I can't associate that anymore because it's already starting down at a 1/2 inch if I wanted to make multiple depths. So that is the reason that you would use the start depth. But in this case, for this type of application, I am not going to use that. So I'm going to double click back in this toolpath, going to change that start depth back to 0 and enter in my total depth of 0.121 1/8 inches. That now means that, yes, I am going to have some wasted cutting moves as I spiral down into the cutting area that is like already removed, but that's the safe way to go. And the reason why I'm saying it's a safe way to go, I may end up with having some other tool that measures 1 1/8 inches deep, and I don't want to make the mistake of starting at a 1/2 inch deep into the material because some of that material hasn't been removed yet. So that is my thought process on that one. Final product is looking the same, and it's not going to cut any deeper there. We could see that by previewing that visible toolpath. We can see it looks identical and cuts in the same place. We just have some wasted moves as it's cutting there if you're making multiple passes. If you're not making multiple passes, that start depth to a 1/2 inch and then cut depth at 5/8 versus start depth of 0, cutting to 1 1/8 inch, the same amount of time to complete that. So that is how I manage all of that. I want to point out what that automatic toolpath is. So we can see this one says automatic. It says automatic because we have the associate with toolpath. Some of them we did not make automatic, like this one here is still set to be manual. I'll explain what that is. So we do know when we calculate toolpaths, it shows us the toolpath here. If we move an object, the toolpath remains where it was. So we have to remember to recalculate all the toolpaths. So there is a nice button there just to make that happen. And we can see that toolpath shifted off and recalculated. Now, if we draw new objects that are on this layer 0.5, so I'm going to make that layer current and draw another object that is on that layer. So that circle is on layer 5, and let's draw another layer that is a new object on this 1 3/8. So I'm going to make the 1 3/8 the current layer and draw a circle here. So confirming we're on 1 3/8, and that is on layer 1/2, and going to go ahead and click recalculate here. Now notice that all of a sudden we have a toolpath for this circle, but not for this one. That is because the toolpath, when we made that based on the layer selection, I associated that toolpath with that layer. So with it being associated and automatic, all newly drawn items on that layer will also be included in a recalculation. So hopefully that made sense and explained why you might want to have that set to automatic. And typically most of my toolpaths, when I use the toolpath template that way, is set to automatic. So I'm surprised all of that took an hour, but we are at an hour, and have plenty of time for questions if anybody has any questions about what we just went over. Is everyone still there?
Ryan, does the bit matter when you're cutting through? Like, is there a certain type of bit that works better for cutting the foam?
Yeah, cutting foam is so normally I would recommend that single flute cutters typically is what you're going to want to use. Low RPM, high feed rate. That is my typical recommendation for most everything. Foam is a little bit different. I cut this foam using a finisher bit, which it's kind of a spiral up with a very low helix, so it doesn't have a big amount of spiral to it, not very aggressive. The finisher bit is also an extremely sharp cut edge on that knife, or on the edge of the cutting knife. I also go with the 3-flute finisher that is able to produce a much better quality finish, and a little bit higher feed rate, or a little bit higher RPM than what I would normally do. I don't know what my chip load calculations are, but when you go to cut this foam, this is when you really see the difference between a conventional cut and a climb cut. I would typically cut this in a conventional direction versus climb. You definitely see a very visibly different edge quality between a climb and a conventional toolpath. So if you ever wonder, does that really make sense? Does there to cut one direction or the other? Cut foam like this, and you will see the difference between a conventional and a climb.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us today.